She hasn't been touched in weeks, maybe months. Not sexually, not emotionally, not felt. No hands that linger. No presence that grounds her. No pressure on her skin that tells her nervous system it can finally rest. And the dangerous part isn't the loneliness itself. It's what happens when the body goes too long without contact. Because when that hunger builds, she doesn't announce it. She doesn't ask for it. She doesn't say, "I need to be held." That would require vulnerability, and vulnerability is risky. Instead, she adapts, quietly, precisely. She performs rituals, small behaviors, seemingly harmless patterns, things most men overlook, dismiss, or misunderstand entirely. A longer shower, a slower routine, a habit of standing just a little closer than necessary, a fixation on texture, scent, sensation. To you, it looks random, coincidental, maybe even meaningless. But it's not. It's the body solving a problem the mind refuses to admit exists. Because touch isn't a luxury, it's regulation. And when it's missing, the nervous system looks for substitutes anywhere and where it can find them. This is the part most men never learn. Women don't fall apart when they're deprived of touch. They reorganize. They reroute. They create quiet coping mechanisms that leak through their behavior in ways you were never trained to see. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. Every coincidence starts to look deliberate. Every pattern starts to make sense. And once you understand why she does this, once you grasp what prolonged touch deprivation actually does to a woman's psychology, you'll realize how powerful touch really is, and why the man who understands it holds more influence than he ever speaks about. Touch deprivation doesn't announce itself as pain. It arrives quietly, like a low-grade withdrawal most people don't know how to name. Her body doesn't collapse when it happens. It tightens. Her skin becomes alert. Her nerves stay awake longer than they should. Her breath never fully settles. This is what most men miss. She isn't craving sex first. Sex is downstream. What she's craving is sensation, pressure, weight, presence. Something external strong enough to interrupt the constant hum inside her nervous system. Because when touch disappears for too long, the body doesn't forget. It keeps track. It remembers every hand that used to ground it, every moment where closeness made the world feel quieter. Her body remembers what her life no longer gives, and that memory doesn't fade just because she's learned how to function without it. Loneliness, at this level, isn't emotional. It's sensory. It's starvation at the level of skin and breath. Attention isn't enough. Words aren't enough. Compliments float past without landing because they don't register where the hunger lives. You can talk to her for hours and still never touch the part of her that's aching. Because the ache isn't in her thoughts. It's in the spaces between her nerves. It's in the absence of friction, warmth, pressure. The body is designed to be regulated by contact. When that regulation disappears, everything else has to work harder to compensate. Her mind becomes busier. Her sleep becomes lighter. Her reactions become sharper or duller, depending on how long the deprivation has gone on. None of this is drama. It's physiology. This is why she can look fine and still be starving. Why she can be surrounded by people and feel untouched. Why she can receive attention all day and still feel empty at night. Because attention is symbolic. Touch is real. Touch tells the nervous system that it's safe to stand down, that it doesn't need to stay alert, that it doesn't have to scan for threats or relief. Without that signal, the body stays braced, always waiting, always slightly on edge. And over time, that tension starts to leak into everything she does. She doesn't think, "I need to be held." She just feels restless, incomplete, slightly disconnected from her own body. The hunger isn't loud, but it's persistent. It shows up as a quiet longing she can't fully explain, even to herself. And beneath all the routines, distractions, and self-control, the truth stays simple and brutal. She doesn't need to be entertained. She doesn't need to be impressed. She needs to be felt again. When the body goes too long without external contact, it doesn't shut down. It compensates. Quietly. Automatically. This is where the first ritual appears, and it's so subtle, most men never register it as anything at all. Long showers that last far beyond necessity. Water hitting her skin, not because she's dirty, but because the steady pressure gives her nervous system something to respond to. Warmth replaces hands. Steam replaces closeness. For those minutes under the water, her body finally has something consistent enough to lean into. This isn't indulgence. It's containment. The body trying to remember what it feels like to be held in one place without needing to stay alert. Then, there are the routines that slow down without explanation. Lotion applied carefully, deliberately, far longer than function requires. Not rushed, not careless. Her hands moving over her arms, her neck, her thighs with an absent focus that looks almost unconscious. She isn't admiring herself. She isn't performing. She's mapping sensation, reintroducing feedback to skin that's gone too long without it. Each stroke is a signal sent inward, not outward. A way of saying, something is here, something is happening. These gestures don't create pleasure, they create calm. And that distinction matters, because pleasure excites the nervous system. Regulation soothes it. This is about survival, not desire. Most men misread this completely when they notice it at all. They assume it's vanity, boredom, habit. But the body doesn't build habits without reason. When no one touches her, her nervous system touches itself. Not for pleasure, for regulation. This is what a system does when it's been left without external grounding for too long. It self-stimulates just enough to lower the internal noise, just enough to take the edge off the constant low-level tension, just enough to function. And here's what makes it unsettling. The more she relies on these substitutes, the quieter the hunger becomes. But it never disappears. It goes underground. It becomes background static she learns to live with. Her tolerance for deprivation, increases, but so does the instability beneath it. Because substitutes don't replace the real thing. They delay the consequences. They stretch time. They keep her operational while something essential stays unmet. This is why she can look composed while her body is slowly starving. Why she can seem calm while her nervous system is doing all the work alone. These rituals aren't a sign of excess. They're evidence of absence. The body stepping in where life no longer provides. And the longer this goes on, the more her system learns one dangerous lesson. Relief doesn't come from outside anymore. It comes from coping, from improvisation, from rituals that were never meant to replace human presence, only to survive without it. As the deprivation stretches on, the body stops keeping the hunger entirely internal. What began as private regulation starts leaking outward into behavior, and this is where most men finally notice something without understanding it. She stands a little closer than the situation requires, not close enough to be obvious, not bold enough to be confrontational, just close enough that distance collapses slightly. A conversation where personal space shrinks, A pause where she doesn't step back. A moment where the gap between bodies feels intentional, even if no one acknowledges it. This isn't confidence, it's calibration. Her nervous system is searching for external feedback again, testing whether the environment will respond. You'll see it when she chooses seats carefully. Next to someone, not across. On the edge of a couch where shoulders might brush if either of you shifts. She positions herself where contact is possible without being demanded, where touch could happen by accident and still feel deniable. These are not bold moves. They're cautious probes. Low-risk experiments designed to answer one question her body has been asking for a long time. Does the world still respond to me physically? Or am I invisible now? This is the truth most men miss completely. She's not flirting. Flirting is expressive. Flirting is intentional. This is quieter than that. This is a system running tests. Her body leaning toward proximity to see if something happens when distance collapses. If a shoulder brushes, does anyone react? If knees touch, does the moment register or pass unnoticed? If she lingers near, does the space hold or dissolve? Each micro-interaction feeds data back into her nervous system. Not about desire, about possibility. And when nothing happens, something inside her recalibrates again. She doesn't get angry. She doesn't feel rejected in the way men imagine. She simply learns. She learns that touch isn't available here either, that contact remains theoretical. And when something does happen, when contact lands, when presence is acknowledged, when her body feels answered, the reaction can feel disproportionate. A small gesture hits deeper than expected. A light touch feels heavier. A brief closeness lingers longer than it should. That's not chemistry. That's accumulated hunger. She's not asking for touch. She's asking if touch is still possible. That's the distinction that changes everything. This isn't about attraction yet, it's about confirmation. Confirmation that her body still exists in the physical world, not just in her own private coping rituals. The longer deprivation lasts, the more loaded these moments become. And this is where things quietly turn dangerous. Because once the nervous system realizes contact is possible again, it doesn't evaluate carefully. It responds. Fast. Deep. Sometimes recklessly. Not because she's careless, but because the body remembers what relief feels like, and it doesn't want to lose it again. As proximity becomes possible again, her senses don't just wake up, they sharpen. Deprivation does that. When touch is missing, sensation becomes sacred. The body starts assigning meaning to textures, pressure, temperature, anything that can register against the skin. This is where men usually get it wrong. They notice the change, but they mislabel it. She dresses differently. Sometimes more exposed. Sometimes more covered. One day tight and deliberate, the next day wrapped and flowing. To the untrained eye, it looks inconsistent. Moody. Maybe performative. It isn't. It's adaptive. Her nervous system is experimenting with how much sensation it needs to feel anchored in her body again. Fabric becomes a language. Soft materials that slide against the skin because they create constant feedback. Tight clothes that apply pressure because pressure imitates contact. Loose, flowing pieces that brush and move because motion keeps sensation alive. None of this is about being seen. It's about being felt. She dresses for feeling, not for attention. Attention is visual. This hunger lives beneath sight. It lives in nerve endings, that have gone too long without stimulation and are now hypersensitive to anything that passes over them. Perfume follows the same logic. Not one spray, not occasional use. Obsession. Scents layered carefully, repeatedly, sometimes changed midday. Smell bypasses thought. It goes straight to the nervous system. When touch isn't available, scent becomes another way to ground herself in the physical world. Something tangible, something immediate, something that says, I am here, I exist, I can be sensed. Men assume this is vanity or seduction. They think it's about being noticed. It's not. It's about self-soothing through sensory input when the body is underfed. And the deeper the deprivation, the stronger this amplification becomes. Sounds feel louder. Fabrics feel heavier. Small sensations carry more emotional weight than they should. This is what happens when the nervous system has been surviving on substitutes for too long. It becomes sensitive, almost raw. Not fragile, alert. Ready. Waiting. That's why her reactions can feel disproportionate. Why she responds strongly to environments, to textures, to atmospheres. She's not dramatic. She's sensitized. This is the danger zone most men never recognize. Sensory amplification isn't about attracting someone. It's about keeping herself regulated in the absence of grounding contact. And when someone finally enters that space with real presence, real touch, real weight, the effect is immediate and profound. Because a system that's been amplifying sensation doesn't experience touch lightly. It experiences it deeply, instantly. And once that happens, the body doesn't forget who finally answered the hunger it's been quietly managing alone. When the body can't get what it needs from the physical world, the mind steps in and builds a substitute reality. This is where the fourth ritual takes shape, and it's the most invisible of all, because it looks like normal life now. Old messages reread late at night, not for information, but for tone, for cadence, for the memory of how it felt when someone once paid attention closely enough to leave an imprint. She doesn't scroll for content. She scrolls for echoes, fragments of connection that still carry emotional residue. Her eyes move, but her nervous system is listening, searching for something familiar enough to calm it. Late-night scrolling isn't boredom, it's sedation, a controlled drip of stimulation that keeps the hunger quiet enough to sleep. Faces, voices, stories, other people's lives playing out on a screen while her body stays untouched. The glow of the phone replaces warmth. The rhythm of tapping replaces heartbeat. It's not satisfying, but it's predictable. And predictability, when touch is gone, feels safer than emptiness. This is dopamine without warmth, stimulation without grounding, relief without repair. Parasocial intimacy deepens the illusion. Videos where someone speaks softly, directly, as if they're addressing her alone. Voices in headphones that feel close enough to almost count as presence. DMs that don't lead anywhere, but still create a momentary sense of being seen. None of this involves real risk. None of it requires vulnerability. That's why it works. Her mind gets to feel what her body can't. Connection without exposure. Attention without consequence. Touch, simulated just enough to quiet the system, but never enough to fulfill it. This is the darkest part of the ritual cycle, because phantom touches don't hurt immediately. They soothe just enough to delay action. They teach the nervous system to accept substitutes instead of demanding the real thing. And over time, That changes her calibration. Real presence starts to feel intense, overwhelming, risky, while digital closeness feels manageable, controllable, safe. She can turn it off whenever she wants. No rejection, no uncertainty, no exposure. But the cost is subtle and cumulative. The more her system feeds on illusion, the harder it becomes to respond naturally to reality. When real connection finally appears, it collides with a nervous system that's been surviving on fragments. That's why reactions feel mismatched, why she can seem distant and hungry at the same time, why real intimacy feels both magnetic and terrifying. Because her body hasn't been touched, it's been distracted, and the distraction keeps the hunger alive while convincing her she's coping. This is where observation turns into consequence, because prolonged touch deprivation doesn't just create coping rituals, it rewires behavior. Quietly at first, then unmistakably. A nervous system that has gone too long without grounding contact doesn't stay neutral. It becomes hungry, and hunger changes how signals are interpreted. What once felt ordinary now lands heavier. What once would have passed unnoticed now registers as meaningful. This is the dangerous turn, because the body stops evaluating with discernment and starts responding with urgency. She becomes easier to emotionally hijack, not because she's weak, but because her system is underfed. When the baseline need hasn't been met, anything that resembles relief feels amplified. A random man's attention suddenly feels intense, not because he's exceptional, but because he's present, because he breaks the drought, even slightly. A look held a second too long, a voice that carries calm, a hand that brushes without apology. These moments don't just register, they flood. The nervous system doesn't ask whether the source is healthy or temporary. It only knows that something finally cut through the static. Small gestures start to feel overwhelming. Not romantic overwhelming, physiological overwhelming. Her body reacts before her mind catches up. Heart rate changes, breath shortens, emotions spike without context. This is where men often mistake hunger for chemistry. They think they're special. They think they triggered something unique. But what they're actually feeling is accumulated deprivation releasing all at once. The reaction isn't about them. It's about timing, about being present when the system was starved enough to latch onto relief. The hungrier the nervous system, the less selective it becomes. That's the rule no one teaches. Selectivity requires abundance. Discernment requires regulation. When touch has been absent for too long, the body stops filtering carefully. It grabs what it can. That's why boundaries blur faster. Why emotions escalate quickly. Why she can feel deeply attached without fully understanding why. This isn't recklessness. It's adaptation under pressure. And this is the part most men never consider. The danger isn't desire, it's misattribution. When hunger is intense, relief gets mistaken for connection. Presence gets mistaken for compatibility. And once that happens, the imprint is fast and deep, because the body doesn't forget who finally interrupted the deprivation, even if the source was accidental, temporary, or unqualified to hold that role long-term. This is how unstable attachments form, how brief encounters leave disproportionate marks, how people end up bonded to moments rather than men. And none of it is conscious. It's a nervous system responding to scarcity, not choice. The tragedy isn't that she reacts strongly, it's that no one taught her what hunger does to perception and no one warned men how dangerous it is to be mistaken for relief when they don't understand the cost of being that substitute. Men misread this because they're trained to look in the wrong place. From the beginning, you're taught to scan for sexual signals, flirtation, innuendo, invitation, desire made obvious. You're conditioned to believe attraction starts there, that if it isn't sexual on the surface, it isn't real. So when you see her standing close, dressing differently, reacting strongly to small gestures, your mind jumps ahead. You assume seduction. You assume intent. You assume the story is already about sex. But that assumption blinds you to what's actually happening underneath. These aren't sexual signals. They're pre-sexual survival signals. They come from a part of the nervous system that doesn't care about fantasy or conquest. It cares about regulation, about grounding, about whether the body feels safe enough to relax. Touch hunger comes before desire, and that order matters more than most men realize. Before a woman can want you, her system needs to feel settled. Before arousal, there has to be relief. Before intimacy, there has to be safety. When you mistake hunger for invitation, you skip the step her body is still trying to complete. This is where confusion starts. You escalate when she's not asking for escalation. You interpret closeness as openness, intensity as readiness, sensitivity as attraction. And when her reactions don't follow the script you expect, you feel blindsided. One moment she's responsive, the next she pulls back. One moment the connection feels electric, the next it collapses. From your perspective, it feels inconsistent. From her body's perspective, it makes perfect sense. You responded to the wrong signal. You see seduction. Her body is asking for safety. That contrast explains almost everything. Safety isn't soft. It isn't passive. It's not politeness or niceness. Safety is the absence of threat. It's the presence of steadiness. It's someone who doesn't rush the system when it's still hungry and raw. Most men never learn to recognize this because no one teaches them to read below desire. They're taught to pursue, to escalate, to interpret intensity as permission. But intensity born from deprivation isn't permission, it's vulnerability. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Once you understand that these behaviors are signals of unmet regulation, not sexual intent, the entire pattern changes. You stop taking reactions personally. You stop mistaking timing for chemistry. And you start seeing what's actually in front of you, a nervous system trying to stabilize itself after too long without touch. Until you can see that, you'll keep misreading hunger as desire and wondering why everything feels close, intense, and fragile at the same time. All of this leads to a single truth most people never articulate. Touch is power, not dominance, not control. Power in the quiet sense, the ability to stabilize a nervous system that's been running on scarcity for too long. When touch is absent, instability grows. Not chaos on the surface, but tension underneath. Hypersensitivity, misplaced intensity, attachment to moments instead of meaning. A system deprived of grounding will search relentlessly for relief. And in that search, it will mistake timing for fate and presence for depth. That's not romance. That's biology left unmanaged. Presence, real presence, changes everything. Grounded touch isn't aggressive. It isn't rushed. It doesn't take. It settles. It tells the body it no longer has to scan, brace, improvise, or compensate. This is why the right kind of touch creates loyalty without asking for it. Not because it's impressive, but because it's rare. Most people stimulate. Very few regulate, and the nervous system remembers the difference instantly. This is where the dynamic flips. The man who understands this doesn't chase reactions. He doesn't escalate hunger. He doesn't confuse intensity with intimacy. He becomes the constant when everything else has been fragments. He doesn't feed the deprivation. He ends it. And when deprivation ends, clarity returns. Discernment comes back online. The noise quiets. The body stops reaching blindly and starts choosing deliberately. That's the level most men never reach because it isn't performative. There's nothing to show off, no visible move, just steadiness, weight, timing, the ability to be present without needing something back immediately. And that presence does something deeper than attraction ever could. It teaches her nervous system where it can rest. The man who understands touch controls the atmosphere, not by force, not by tricks, but by being the place her nervous system finally rests.